The security camera footage was crystal clear. Karen's Mercedes plowing into the parked Honda, her stumbling out drunk, then her cold calculation as she dialed 911 to report the reckless driver who hit her. But what Karen didn't know was that the car belonged to the one person in the neighborhood who had been quietly gathering evidence of her reign of terror for months. And when the police arrived to find her victim waiting with a folder full of secrets that could destroy everything Karen had built, the hunted was about to become the hunter. The rain drummed against Sarah Chun's apartment window like impatient fingers, each drop catching the amber glow of the streetlights below. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching the empty parking spaces of Willowbrook Estates fill with puddles. Her Honda Civic sat alone under the flickering light of space. 47, the spot she'd fought tooth and nail to keep when Karen Whitmore decided it was too close to the mailboxes and disrupted the aesthetic flow of the complex. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another email from the HOA subject: urgent parking violation, notice number 47, Ms. Chen. Your vehicle has been observed parked in space 47 for more than the allotted time. Please reference HOA Guidelines, Section 12.3. B regarding overnight parking restrictions. Overnight parking restrictions, Sarah muttered, scrolling through the rest of Karen's latest fabrication. There were no overnight parking restrictions. There never had been. But Karen Whitmore, self-appointed Queen of Willowbrook Estates, had made it her personal mission to make Sarah's life miserable ever since she'd dared to question the HOA's decision to ban ethnic cooking smells from the common areas. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Karen had singled out her grandmother's traditional Chinese recipes while conveniently ignoring Mrs. Patterson's Fish Fry Fridays or the Kowalski family's pierogi parties. But Karen had power. She was HOA president, married to a city councilman, and possessed the kind of passive-aggressive persistence that wore people down like water over stone. Sarah had been documenting everything for 3 months now. Every bogus violation notice, every selective enforcement of made-up rules, every time Karen's own family violated actual HOA guidelines without consequence. The folder on her desk had grown thick with evidence, but she'd been waiting for the right moment to act. In her experience as a forensic accountant, patience always paid off. People like Karen eventually overplayed their hand. Thunder cracked overhead, and Sarah's laptop screen reflected her tired face. She'd been working late again, analyzing financial records for a client's divorce case, another person trying to prove someone wasn't who they claimed to be. The parallels to her own situation weren't lost on her. A flash of headlights swept across her window, and Sarah glanced down to see a silver Mercedes weaving through the parking lot. Even from the 4th floor, she could tell the driver was struggling to stay between the lines. The car lurched left, then overcorrected right, tires squealing against the wet asphalt. Sarah recognized the custom license plate. Hopra's Karen had had it made. The moment she'd bullied her way into the HOA presidency 2 years ago, ousting the previous president over some manufactured scandal about misappropriated landscaping funds, the same landscaping funds that Sarah suspected had gone directly into Karen's own backyard renovation, based on the timeline of violations she'd been tracking. The Mercedes approached Sarah's Honda, and for a moment, Sarah thought Karen might actually park properly for once. But then the car kept coming, its trajectory wobbly and erratic. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was about to happen. No. The impact was sickening. The Mercedes clipped the Honda's rear bumper with enough force to spin the smaller car sideways, its alarm immediately shrieking into the night. Sarah watched in horror as her car, her only means of transportation, still carrying payments she could barely afford, crumpled against the concrete parking barrier. But it was what happened next that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. Karen Whitmore stumbled out of her Mercedes, clearly intoxicated, surveying the damage with the calculating look of someone whose first instinct wasn't remorse or concern, but she pulled out her phone, swaying slightly as she dialed. Sarah grabbed her jacket and phone, racing for the stairs. She could hear Karen's voice echoing off the buildings as she descended, each word making her angrier. Yes, 911. I need to report a reckless driver who hit my car and fled the scene. The vehicle appears to be abandoned now, but there's significant damage to my Mercedes. By the time Sarah burst through the lobby doors, Karen was in full performance mode, tears streaming down her face as she spoke to the dispatcher. The woman who'd made Sarah's life hell for months, who'd weaponized HOA rules like a personal army, was now playing the victim with an Oscar-worthy display of distress. Karen. Sarah's voice cut through the rain and the Honda's wailing alarm. What the hell did you do to my car? Karen spun around, her expression cycling through surprise, calculation, and finally settling on righteous indignation. Even drunk, she was quick to adapt her story. Sarah, thank God you're here. Did you see what happened? Some maniac hit both our cars and drove off. I was just getting home from the city council meeting. You know how dedicated I am to serving our community when I witnessed the whole thing. The smell of alcohol hung around Karen like expensive perfume. Sarah had dealt with enough corporate fraud cases to recognize a lie in progress, but the sheer audacity of this one took her breath away. You're lying, Sarah said flatly. I saw you hit my car from my window. You were driving drunk. Karen, that's a serious accusation, young lady. Karen's voice took on the imperious tone she used at HOA meetings. I'll have you know I've never had so much as a parking ticket. Unlike some people in this complex who seem to think rules don't apply to them. More headlights swept across the lot as the first police cruiser arrived, followed quickly by a second. Sarah recognized Officer Martinez from previous HOA complaints. Karen had him on speed dial for every minor infraction she could manufacture. Mrs. Whitmore, Martinez called out as he approached. You called about a hit and run. Yes, Officer Martinez. As I told the dispatcher, I witnessed a reckless driver collide with both vehicles before fleeing the scene. Thankfully, I wasn't injured, but as you can see, there's substantial damage. Karen gestured to her Mercedes, which had barely a scratch compared to Sarah's mangled Honda. Sarah stepped forward. Officer Martinez. That's not what happened. Mrs. Whitmore was driving drunk and hit my parked car. I saw the entire thing from my apartment window. Martinez looked between the two women, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Sarah had always respected his professionalism, even when he'd been forced to respond to Karen's frivolous complaints. Mrs. Whitmore, have you been drinking tonight? He asked. Karen's laugh was pitched perfectly between shocked and offended. Officer, I'm insulted that you would even ask. I attended a city council meeting this evening, a dry event. I assure you Anne came straight home. I've been a model citizen of this community for 15 years. Ms. Chen, on the other hand, has a history of making false accusations against HOA leadership. Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest. Karen was good at this spinning reality until up became down and victims became perpetrators. But Sarah had learned a few things about building cases over the years. Officer Martinez, I'd like to request that Mrs. Whitmore take a sobriety test, Sarah said calmly. I believe she's intoxicated, and I'm willing to provide a witness statement about what I observed. That won't be necessary, Karen said quickly. I'm perfectly sober, and frankly, I'm concerned about Ms. Chen's mental state. She's been harassing me for months with unfounded complaints about HOA policies. This is clearly an escalation of her vendetta against me. Officer Martinez looked at Karen more carefully, and Sarah caught something shift in his expression. Maybe it was the way Karen swayed slightly as she spoke, or the careful enunciation that drunk people used when trying to sound sober, but his cop instincts were kicking in. Ma'am, would you mind taking a few steps toward my vehicle? Martinez asked. I'd like to get your full statement about what you witnessed. As Karen walked toward the police car, her attempt to move in a straight line failed spectacularly. She caught herself against the hood, laughing nervously. These heels are terrible in the rain, she said. I should have worn something more practical. But Sarah noticed Karen was wearing flats. Martinez noticed too. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to ask you to perform a standard field sobriety test. This is routine in any traffic incident. This is harassment, Karen protested, but her voice had lost some of its authority. I'm the victim here. I demand to speak to your supervisor. You can certainly make that request, ma'am, but first I need you to complete the test. As Martinez guided Karen through the field sobriety assessment, Sarah watched the woman who'd terrorized her for months struggle to walk a straight line. Karen stumbled twice, nearly fell during the one-leg stand, and when Martinez asked her to recite the alphabet, she made it to P before losing track entirely. The breathalyzer result was 0.12, well over the legal limit. Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for driving under the influence, Martinez said, reaching for his handcuffs. The transformation was immediate and ugly. Karen's mask of Part 2. The Ion VSI JTO in the Willowbrook County Jail wasn't designed for people like Karen Whitmore. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on her tear-streaked face as she sat on the narrow bench. Her designer blouse wrinkled and stained. With mascara, the polyester blanket they'd given her smelled of industrial detergent and desperation. This is a mistake, she whispered to the public defender assigned to her case, a tired-looking woman named Janet Pierce who'd seen 1,000 Karens come through these doors. I shouldn't be here. My husband, your husband, can't bail you out. Until your arraignment tomorrow morning, Pierce interrupted, not looking up from her notes. DUI with property damage. First offense, so you'll probably get probation and community service, assuming you plead guilty. Plead guilty. Karen's voice cracked. I'm not guilty of anything except being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That woman Sarah Chun, she orchestrated this whole thing. She's been harassing me for months. Pierce finally looked up, her expression skeptical. Mrs. Whitmore, your blood alcohol was 0.12. There were witnesses. The evidence is pretty clear. But Karen wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about Sarah's smile as the police car pulled away, cold, calculating, victorious. It was the same expression Karen recognized in the mirror, when she'd successfully forced another resident to comply with her vision of how Willowbrook Estates should operate. The realization that she'd underestimated her opponent sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the jail's air conditioning. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Sarah sat in Detective Marcus Williams' cluttered office, watching him scroll through financial records on his computer screen. They'd known each other since college. back when Marcus was studying criminal justice and Sarah was diving deep into forensic accounting. The Morrison case where Sarah's analysis had helped Marcus crack $1 million embezzlement scheme had cemented their professional friendship. Jesus, Sarah, Marcus muttered, highlighting another discrepancy. How long did you say this woman has been HOA president? 2 years, but she's been on the board for 5. Sarah leaned forward, pointing to a line item on the screen. Look at that landscaping expense from 18 months ago. $43,000 for common area improvements. Marcus clicked through to the supporting documentation, but according to the invoices, the work was done at 412 Maple Lane. Karen's address, Sarah confirmed. And if you cross-reference it with the city permits, you'll see that's exactly when she had her backyard renovated. New pool, hardscaping, the works. That's not even subtle. Marcus shook his head. What else do you have? Sarah opened her same one that had been growing thicker by the week. Snow removal contracts that were never fulfilled, but payments went out anyway. The company address traces back to a P.O. box registered under her maiden name. Security system upgrades that somehow only benefited the board members' units. And, my personal favorite, she pulled out a photograph. The new playground equipment that was supposedly installed last spring. Marcus studied the image of an empty lot. I don't see any playground equipment, because it doesn't exist, but the HOA paid $57,000 for it. Sarah's voice was steady, professional, but Marcus could hear the anger underneath. Marcus, she's been systematically stealing from 238 families for years. The total I've calculated so far is over $300,000. Why didn't anyone notice before now? Because Karen's smart. She kept individual amounts small, spread them across different budget categories, and most importantly, Sarah pulled out another document. She convinced the board to switch from quarterly financial reports to annual ones. Most residents don't pay attention to HOA finances anyway, and by the time the annual report came out, people had forgotten what projects were supposed to be completed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the scope of what Sarah was showing him. This is a federal case. You know, mail fraud, wire fraud, potentially racketeering if we can prove conspiracy. I know, but I want to handle this right. Karen's got connections, her husband's on the city council, she knows judges has friends in the prosecutor's office. If we move too fast or make any mistakes, she'll wiggle out of it. What do you want me to do? Sarah smiled, the same cold expression that had haunted Karen in her jail cell. I want you to help me build an airtight case. Every transaction, every fake invoice, every stolen dollar. And Marcus, I want to do it while she's distracted dealing with her DUI. The next morning, Karen sat in Judge Patricia Hoffman's courtroom, her lawyer husband Richard beside her. He'd arrived at the jail at dawn, his face tight with controlled fury not at his wife's actions, but at the inconvenience they'd caused him. How could you be so stupid? He'd hissed in the courthouse hallway. Do you have any idea what this could do to my campaign? Richard Whitmore was running for state senate, his platform built on family values and community responsibility. A drunk driving arrest wasn't exactly the image he wanted splashed across campaign ads. Judge Hoffman reviewed the case file with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Whitmore, you're charged with driving under the influence and destruction of property. How do you plead? Karen stood, her chin raised defiantly. Richard had coached her on this moment. Admit minimal guilt, express remorse, emphasize her community service record. Your Honor, I plead guilty to the DUI charge, but I maintain that the property damage was the result of Mrs. Whitmore. Judge Hoffman interrupted. You either plead guilty to all charges or not guilty to all charges. You don't get to pick and choose. Sarah sat in the gallery, watching Karen's face cycle through confusion, anger, and calculation. She'd taken a personal day from work to be here, wanting to see how Karen handled being held accountable for the first time in years. Not guilty, Your Honor, Karen finally said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. Very well. Trial is set for 6 weeks from today. Bail is set at $5,000, and I'm ordering immediate installation of an ignition interlock device on any vehicle you operate. As the judge's gavel fell, Sarah slipped out of the courtroom. She had work to do. The next few days passed. In a blur of activity, Sarah took vacation time and threw herself into the investigation with the focused intensity that had made her one of the most sought-after forensic accountants in the region. She cross-referenced bank records, tracked down vendors, and built a timeline that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning years. Marcus helped where he could, running background checks and following paper trails through official channels. What they discovered went beyond simple embezzlement. Look at this, Sarah said, spreading documents across Marcus's desk. Karen didn't just steal money, she actively sabotaged legitimate projects to cover her tracks. What do you mean? Last year, the HOA approved repairs to the community center roof. $40,000 allocated. But instead of hiring the legitimate contractor who'd submitted the winning bid, Karen hired her brother-in-law's company, which doesn't actually exist, and pocketed the money. When residents complained about the leaking roof, she blamed unexpected structural issues that would require additional assessments. Marcus whistled low. How many people were affected by that? The community center serves as the after-school program location. 200 kids had to find alternative arrangements when water damage forced it to close. Some families had to quit their jobs because they couldn't afford private childcare. The personal cost of Karen's greed was becoming clear, and it made Sarah's determination burn brighter. This wasn't just about money, it was about the lives Karen had disrupted to fund her lifestyle. But Karen wasn't sitting idle. 2 days after her arraignment, Sarah received a formal notice from the HOA board. Urgent. Emergency board meeting. Dissolution of property management contract. Ms. Chen, your services as community liaison are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Additionally, the board has voted to initiate legal action regarding your ongoing harassment campaign against HOA leadership. Sarah read the notice twice, then started laughing. Karen was trying to silence her the only way she knew how. Bureaucratic intimidation. But what Karen didn't realize was that Sarah no longer cared about HOA politics or community liaisons. She cared about justice. That evening, Sarah knocked on apartment doors throughout Willowbrook Estates. She started with the families she knew had been most affected by Karen's schemes, the Johnsons, whose special needs son had relied on the community center programs. The elderly Petrowskis, who'd been hit with bogus fines that nearly forced them from their home. The young Martinez family, who'd paid extra assessments for improvements that never materialized. At each door, Sarah shared carefully selected pieces of her evidence, not enough to compromise the investigation, but sufficient to show patterns of financial irregularities and selective rule enforcement. I always wondered why my fees kept going up while services got worse, Mrs. Johnson said, studying the documents Sarah had brought. Remember when she tried to fine us for parking the wheelchair van in our own driveway? Mr. Petrowski added, said it violated aesthetic standards. Word spread quickly through the complex. By the end of the week, Sarah had a group of 30 residents who'd agreed to review their own HOA records and document instances of questionable charges or settlements. The fluorescent lights in the FBI field office buzzed with the persistence of angry wasps. As Special Agent Rebecca Torres spread the documents across the conference table, Sarah sat across from her, watching the federal agent's expression grow darker with each page she turned. Mrs. Chen, this is extensive, Torres said finally, looking up from a bank routing slip that traced HOA funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. How long did you say you've been documenting this? 3 months of active investigation, but I've been keeping informal records for over a year. Sarah's voice was steady, professional. She'd spent the weekend organizing everything into a presentation that would make even the most skeptical federal prosecutor take notice. The total theft I can prove definitively is $347,000, but I suspect it goes much higher. Detective Williams shifted in his chair beside her. The local DA wanted to handle this as a simple embezzlement case, but given the interstate banking, violations and mail fraud elements, this belongs in federal court, Torres finished. Mrs. Chen, I have to ask, what's your relationship with the suspect? This level of detailed financial analysis suggests either professional expertise or personal motivation. Both, Sarah admitted. I'm a forensic accountant, and Karen Whitmore made my life hell for months. But this isn't about revenge. It's about justice for everyone she stole from. Torres nodded, making notes. We'll need to verify everything independently, of course, but this gives us an excellent roadmap. How much does the suspect know about your investigation? As of yesterday, she knows enough to be scared. That was an understatement. After the HOA meeting, Karen had spent the night calling in every favor she'd accumulated over 15 years of social climbing. By dawn, she'd arranged meetings with 3 different lawyers, contacted her husband's political allies, and even reached out to her college roommate, who now worked in the state attorney general's office. But Karen's panic was working against her. In her desperation to contain the damage, she was making mistakes that only deepened her legal jeopardy. Richard Whitmore discovered this when he arrived at his law office Monday morning to find FBI agents waiting in the parking lot. Mr. Whitmore, Special Agent Torres, FBI Financial Crimes Division, we'd like to ask you some questions about your wife's activities as HOA president. Richard's political instincts kicked in immediately. I'm afraid I can't comment on ongoing legal matters involving my wife. You'll need to speak with her attorney. Actually, sir, we're more interested in your role as co-signer on several HOA accounts. The blood drained from Richard's face. He'd signed those papers without reading them, trusting Karen to handle the community finances while he focused on his political career. Now that trust was about to destroy everything he'd worked for. I need to call my lawyer. That's certainly— You're right, sir, but I should mention that we've already frozen the accounts in question pending our investigation. Richard's phone was buzzing incessantly, reporters who'd gotten wind of the FBI activity, political rivals sensing blood in the water, and campaign donors asking uncomfortable questions. By noon, 3 major endorsements had been quietly withdrawn, and his campaign manager had submitted her resignation. Karen, meanwhile, was discovering that her network of protection wasn't as solid as she'd believed. The city councilman she'd counted as an ally suddenly couldn't take her calls. The judge, who'd presided over her DUI case, recused himself from any future proceedings involving her name. Even her country club friends began finding excuses to avoid her. But Karen Whitmore hadn't clawed her way to the top of Willowbrook Estate's social hierarchy by accepting defeat gracefully. If she was going down, she'd take as many people with her as possible. Her first target was Sarah. Tuesday morning. Sarah arrived at work to find 2 police officers waiting in her office lobby. Ms. Chen, we have a warrant to search your premises in connection with allegations of harassment and cyberstalking. Sarah's boss, David Kim, appeared at her elbow, his face tight with concern. Sarah, what's going on? Karen Whitmore filed complaints, Sarah said calmly, recognizing the trap. Officers, I assume you have the warrant paperwork. As she reviewed the documents, Sarah saw Karen's strategy clearly. By claiming that Sarah had hacked HOA computers and created fraudulent documents, Karen was trying to discredit the evidence before it could be used against her. It was desperate, but potentially effective if Sarah couldn't prove the authenticity of her records. The search turned up nothing. Incriminating Sarah was too smart to keep anything compromising at work, but the damage to her professional reputation was immediate. Clients began asking questions, colleagues whispered in hallways, and Sarah found herself called into David's office for an uncomfortable conversation about maintaining the firm's ethical standards. I know you, Sarah, David said, closing his office door. You're one of the most honest people I've ever worked with. But perception matters in this business. Maybe you should consider taking a leave of absence until this sorts itself out. She's trying to silence me, Sarah replied. David, if I back down now, she wins, and a lot of innocent people continue to suffer. I'm not asking you to back down. I'm asking you to be smart about how you proceed. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. She had 3 missed calls from reporters, 2 from lawyers offering their services, and 1 from her mother asking if the news stories about her were true. The weight of what she'd started was settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about Karen and Amor, it was about federal crimes, political scandals, and media attention that could destroy lives, including her own. But then she thought about Mrs. Johnson, crying as she explained how the closure of the after-school program had forced her to quit her job, about the elderly Petroskis living on Social Security and struggling to pay the bogus fines Karen had invented, about all the families who'd trusted their HOA fees to be used for their community's benefit, not to fund Karen's luxury lifestyle. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed. Marcus, it's me. Karen's fighting back. She's filed false charges against me, trying to discredit the evidence. I figured she might try something like that. Sarah, maybe you should step back and let the FBI handle this from here. No, Sarah's voice was firm. I'm seeing this through, but I need your help with something. What do you need? I need to know everything about Karen's finances, not just the HOA theft, everything. Her personal accounts, her husband's campaign, funds, their investment portfolio. If she's willing to file false charges against me, she's desperate enough to have made other mistakes. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, that's dancing pretty close to the line of what I can legally do. Then don't do it legally. Do it as a favor for a friend who's trying to stop a criminal from destroying more lives. The next morning, Marcus called back with information that made Sarah's hands shake as she wrote it down. Sarah, you're not going to believe this. Karen's been running the same scam in 2 other communities. There's an HOA in Riverside where she was consulting on financial management, $40,000 missing. Another in Oakwood where she served on the board before Willowbrook, $60,000 in unexplained expenses. How is that possible? She's been rotating through communities every few years, staying just long enough to establish trust and implement her systems, then moving on before anyone notices the missing money. Willowbrook is just the place where she finally got caught. Sarah felt sick. The scope of Karen's crimes was far beyond what she'd imagined. Marcus, how many families has she stolen from based on what I've found so far? Over And Sarah, the amounts are getting bigger. She's been perfecting her methods. That afternoon, Sarah requested a meeting with Agent Torres. She walked into the FBI office carrying a new folder. This one containing evidence of a criminal enterprise that spanned years and multiple jurisdictions. Agent Torres, I need to show you something. Karen Whitmore isn't just a local embezzler. She's been systematically targeting HOA communities across 3 counties. Torres reviewed the new evidence with growing amazement. Mrs. Chen, how did you obtain this information? Sources close to the investigation, Sarah replied carefully. The important thing is that it's verifiable. Every transaction, every bank record, every fake invoice. This changes everything. We're not looking at simple theft anymore. This is organized fraud on a massive scale. Torres picked up her phone. I need to call the U.S. Attorney's Office. Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to testify before a federal grand jury? Absolutely. But Karen had one more card to play. Thursday evening, Sarah arrived home to find her apartment door ajar, her heart pounding. She called 911 and waited for police in the hallway. When officers cleared the apartment, they found it thoroughly ransacked, drawers pulled out, papers scattered. Her computer missing. Looks like a burglary, Officer Martinez said, the same cop who'd arrested Karen for DUI. Was anything valuable taken? Sarah looked around at the destruction, noting what was missing and what wasn't. Her jewelry was untouched. Her expensive camera equipment remained on the shelf. But her computer was gone, along with the physical files she'd kept as backup documentation. This wasn't a random burglary, she told Martinez. Whoever did this was looking for specific documents. You think this is connected to the